Hello, you are listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your hosts, Thomas and Tammy Ferreira.
Hi, I'm Tammy.
And I'm Thomas.
And today we're going to talk about why disciplining your children will not hurt your child custody case.
In fact, it might even help it.
In fact, if they're teenagers, it might make them go live with the other parent and you'll get rid of them.
No, I'm not sure that's what the listeners want.
No, that's not what we're going for.
That's generally not what they're going for, at least when they're young. Well,
I was going to say, if they have teenagers, that might be what they're going for.
Right. Well, the other day I was sitting at a restaurant and this adorable little boy with curly hair, just the sweetest little guy, walked by, and I leaned over to Tammy and I said, "That is a future rotten teenager right there."
Yeah, you can tell Thomas and I are in the rotten teenage phase, actually round 2, so which is proving to be just as challenging as round 1 was for us.
Right.
So,
well, but you want to raise children that respect authority,
right?
Because if they don't respect authority, when they get to be teenagers and you try to discipline them, you won't believe the string of expletives they can put together.
I don't know where they learned that.
I'm not sure. It's like that movie, A Christmas Story, where the father's always blurting out expletives.
Yeah, and then one day you start hearing them back, right?
That's right. That's what happens. But in general, what the courts are looking for here is good parenting.
Right.
So good parenting means, well, excuse me, we don't have a cough button.
Well, I would say to just to correct you before
Yeah.
you even start here, not even necessarily good parenting. We always say that the court looks for adequate parenting, right? So there's sort of a minimum bar.
Right. But after that, I mean,
Right.
what they want you to do is not lobby the children
Right.
against the other parent. And
Right.
that's a big, touchy subject. And it's easy to fall into the trap of, if I confront my child about anything, they're going to want to live with dad, or they're going to want to live with mom.
Right.
And so I can't, my hands are tied. I can't really give them the kind of guidance. There's a proverb in the Bible that says, the person who spares the rod, and I'm using the rod metaphorically here,
Right.
hates his son.
In other words, anybody that doesn't discipline their child.
Right. If you have little kids and they're so cute, but they just mouth off and they eventually you're not going to be able to control them.
Right.
If you do that.
Right.
Like, what is that? There was some video on the YouTube about Linda. Remember that?
Yeah. Listen, Linda. Yeah. The little boy was like 4 or something.
Right.
And I think it was his grandmother. No, maybe it was his mother. Yeah. He was talking to, and he said, "You're not listening to me, Linda." And he was calling her by name.
Right. And the video is really funny. Okay.
It's very cute. He's a very cute little boy.
It's very funny, but it's not funny.
Right.
Because that kid is going to be a teenager someday, and listen, Linda is going to translate into disrespect for authority figures in his life, especially his parents.
Right.
And you can't seed that ground.
Right.
You really can't.
Right. And you don't always understand that when they're little. Thomas and I have children that are about 10 years apart. So that's why I say we're in Evil Teenagers round 2, because his 2 are going through it now, and my 2 went through it, about 10 years ago or more. So it's kind of funny because at the time, I think, Thomas had this idea that it was just my kids, that were evil, and that his kids weren't going to be that way. But, fast forward round 2, and it's like we're seeing a lot of similarities, and he's going, "Oh, that wasn't just your kids. That's just because of the age."
Right.
And that's true. And if you don't kind of get that authority established when they're young, the teenage years just become almost impossible to manage.
Right. Yeah. I'm kind of like Adam Sandler in what is it called? Fatherhood? Is that the name of the movie that he's in? The one where he raises the kid. and he puts paper on the floor.
Big Daddy.
Big Daddy, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Big Daddy. And remember there, I mean, he's the most permissive parent in the world. And of course, the kid likes him because he's so permissive.
Right.
But in the real world, in the non-Hollywood world, you're basically creating a monster.
Right.
And it's not their fault.
Right.
Because they do have to, I find that when parents abandon the guardrails with their kids, it tends to have the opposite effect of what they think is going to happen.
Right.
Because the court sees that the kid is in control.
Right.
Okay. The kid can't be in control. And the problem is that now you have parents that cannot agree on how to raise the child.
Right. Right. And this becomes the whole problem because, like Thomas said, we all kind of have that thought, especially if you have younger kids. It's like you really have that thought in your head where it's like, I want the kids to like me better.
Yeah.
And not always necessarily like liking me as a person better, but I want them to like being in my home more.
Right.
I want to sort of beat the other parent at
Yeah.
the parenting game.
Me too.
Right?
Me too. I think we all feel that way.
Yeah, we all feel that way to
Yeah.
some extent. The question is, are we able to set that aside in the interest of our children and recognize that, the children really do better in a situation where they're going back and forth between, the two homes. And,
Right.
I don't necessarily mean it in an exactly equal schedule. And sometimes that isn't possible. Parents live far apart. Sometimes one parent has some sort of alcoholism or mental illness or they're abusive or what have you. There's all kinds of different scenarios. But I think that what happens for a lot of us in the typical situations is we do want the kids' affections to be stronger for us. And sometimes what we do inadvertently as a result of that is we soften our approach to discipline.
Yeah. And that can lead the kid to start manipulating you.
Right. Right. And a lot of people worry about what is okay in the court's eyes and what isn't okay in the court's eyes.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that's not okay in the court's eyes, in my opinion, is putting the child in the middle and having them be in control of their parents.
Right.
So, if you can't agree, if you can't get agreement, we do the wall and the parallel parenting thing, and I think we've done that ad nauseum, so
Right.
I don't need to repeat it. But if you're in a situation where you have so much conflict in your co-parenting relationship that you can't agree on parenting methods, then you have to agree to disagree.
Right. And you have to carry out the discipline in your own home and not worry about what the other parent's doing.
Right. And in my experience, after having done a lot of cases, is that the parent that establishes solid guardrails and boundaries, the child over time, the child gravitates to that world. And the reason is because children with their undeveloped brains, and when I say children, I mean younger than teenagers,
Right.
they crave a certain amount of structure in the house.
Right.
They want
It makes them feel safe and secure.
Exactly. Right. And if they can push you over, then they feel less secure.
Right.
Over time.
Right.
You may score a point with them if you give them candy for dinner.
Right.
But after a while, if they're too loose, children don't want to be their own parents.
Right.
They want you to be the parent.
Right.
They want you. I was helping. I have an 18-year-old son, and I helped him vote.
For the first time.
For the first time, he's going to vote in the election. Isn't that cute? And I raised him to, luckily, I'm not going to say which way I go, but I raised him to think like me. So
So you agree with the way he thinks.
Yes, I do agree with the way, and he agrees with the way I think.
Right.
But what I did is I sent him a picture of my ballot.
Is that what you were doing, taking pictures of it?
Right before the podcast started.
I saw you sitting here taking pictures of it while I was working on the other stuff. I thought, what is he taking pictures of his ballot for?
Right. And he looks to me, he sees me as an authority figure in his life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not telling him he's got to fill out his ballot the same way I do. I just go, hey, here's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
You can, if you want, if you
Here's
find
my reasoning, and you can do your own research and figure out if you agree.
right. So who knows what he's going to do? But I think it gives him a certain sense of calm and structure to have a father that puts some guardrails. You're not going to do, son, you're not going to do that.
Right.
Right.
Right. And I think that sort of the flip side of what people fall into also with the court being involved is maybe they're more worried about some discipline being held against them or whatever. It's not necessarily that they would normally be permissive or, even give in to those internal feelings of, wanting the kid to like you more or whatever, which, like we said, like we all have deep down, we don't really talk about it, but we all kind of have this little snickering part of us that wants to win the parenting game,
Yes.
But I think beyond that,
oddly, it's our inner child that wants
that. I'm gonna beat you. but ironically, what happens is that you're not always sure, like what is okay in the court's eyes, what isn't okay in the court's eyes. What is the other parent going to be able to use against me? We have fear of losing time with our children and different things if we're doing things we ought or things that the court would frown upon. And I'll start with corporal punishment, and obviously you need to chime in on this.
We're going to tackle corporal punishment in this
because you're the attorney, so I think you should speak to a lot of this.
No, totally.
But I want to start with corporal punishment only because this is the reason. Thomas has been in a parenting plan since his children were 1 and 2. We have never used corporal punishment with them. And
although we do threaten them once in a while. I'm kidding.
Threaten to kick their butt, but we've not done it yet. Yeah. So I'll just start with saying different states have different laws around corporal punishment. In California in particular, it's not against the law to use corporal punishment on your children. You're not allowed to use an implement like I can't tell you how many times I was whacked with a wooden spoon or whatever, a switch. I used to have to go cut my own switch off the tree, I
thought you liked that.
Oh,
wait a minute.
Wrong wife. But I used to have to go cut a switch off the tree. And so, I grew up in Kentucky, and that's what they sent you to do.
Right. I remember that too. Go get me a switch.
Yeah, go get me a switch off that
tree.
Go
get me a switch from the whipping tree.
Like that. And so I did have corporal punishment used on me, and I did subsequently use corporal punishment on my children. Now, I would say not as often, and I never used a switch on them, but I do remember a couple of really severe violations where I got a belt. And so but I think that when you look at this in court, you just never did. And part of the reason was because you didn't want them to have anything that they could even possibly use against you. And our other concern was that in Mom's household, she was remarried, and that person was very, very strict.
Yeah.
And so we had concerns that corporal punishment would be implemented in the other household in an
inappropriate way.
In an inappropriate way, and that it would be really hard on the children. So we made a very conscious effort early on to not implement any corporal punishment. Now, I can tell you my so far in the running, of course, Thomas's kids are still in development, but I think that in many ways,
they're late bloomers.
My child that received the most corporal punishment seems to have, really, I don't want to say like turned into a better child than his brother. That's not fair. His brother's a different person. I love them both equally, but he was a lot more strong-willed in a lot of ways when he was a child.
Who are you talking about?
My younger son.
The younger son.
Yeah,
okay.
he was a lot more strong-willed in a lot of ways, and so I think he got more of the corporal punishment just by way of his personality. And I don't think that you would know now that he was like this really strong, defiant child, to watch him.
Well,
So-
you would know by looking at his daughter, though.
That's true. He's got one that's a pistol that's just like him. So yeah, that is true. He's now learning what it's like. But, so I don't think you have to be concerned necessarily that you're going to be in trouble for using any kind of corporal punishment, particularly in California, as long as you're not using, implements on them or, throwing a shoe at them or doing something like that. But you do have to consider that whatever you do in one household is going to be fair game in the other household.
Yeah, that's true. Well, a lot of times I see in reports where corporal punishment is an issue. When I say reports, I mean expert reports like family court services and custody evaluations and whatnot. And I see this over and over again, that if you use physical violence to punish a child, he's going to learn that, or she is going to learn that physical violence is the way to solve problems. And I don't think I've ever seen any evidence for that proposition.
Yeah.
Most of the people that I know who practice corporal punishment have well-behaved kids.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Yeah.
Go figure. And I would cite my pastor that who had, how many kids does he have? 6.
Mm-hmm.
He has 6, and these are the most unbelievably well-behaved. They were all really great kids. And of course, our worship leader to now has, and how do you do that?
Yeah. And I would say that my younger son was easier as a teenager. And I do think that that's partially because I was heavier handed with the corporal punishment. But this is not a debate about corporal punishment per se. That this is really just to say that, you can implement it. It's not seen as necessarily being abusive or anything. But the thing I would caution you about is if you have somebody on the other side that you are worried about is going to use discipline inappropriately, right, or tends toward the kind of more abusive side, or loses their temper, has anger management problems, things like that, you probably don't want to use it on.
You can cross the line into abuse.
You probably don't want to use it on your end because you don't want them using it on their end.
Right. And you don't really have to.
Right. And most of the time, Thomas is right. Like the majority of the reports that we see coming out of the courts recommend no corporal punishment. That's sort of the courts. If the court has to come down on one side or the other, they sort of say, right, not a good idea.
Yeah. And about 10 years ago, this book came out it's called Redirecting Children's Behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the courts still love that. I haven't looked into that for a long time because of course, my kids are
older.
Yeah, I my younger child is a month. I think he's 28 days from being 18. Holy mackerel! He used to be a little tiny baby. But anyway,
24 actually, not to burst your bubble, but
yeah, I'll tell you. One of the things that this does, the idea behind redirecting children's behavior is that you have consequences for behavior that are rational, related, and respectful. I think those are the 3 R's of RBC.
I think it's I don't think it's rational. It's some other word. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah,
I digress.
Rational means it's got to have some connection to the offense. And I'll give you an example. When the boys were, I don't know, they were in 1st and 2nd grade, I want to say, because they were still over at Impressa. So it must have been before Isaiah was in 3rd grade. And we were in a grocery store, and the kids shoplifted a couple of things off the impulse counter. And I don't think that's at all unusual. A lot of parents have seen this happen. And you want to teach your kids that theft is wrong. It's your duty as a parent to teach them right from wrong. So what we did, and I think this was a really good, rational and related and respectful consequence.
Reasonable. It's reasonable, related, and respectful.
Reasonable.
Yeah.
Rational,
not
reasonable.
Rational,
I knew it had to begin with R. Otherwise, it would be the T and 2 R's, or whatever. Shut up. Okay. So Darcy's my middle name, by the way. If anybody
Yeah,
wonders what
he's talking to himself.
That's what I.
In third person by the
There you
name
go.
he calls himself, which isn't Thomas. But
So we
anyway.
brought the kids in. We asked for the manager,
Right.
and we made them return the items to the manager and apologize.
Right.
And the manager gave them a speech about how this is a grocery store and this is the way we make our living.
Right.
And when you steal from us, it's like you're taking money out of our pocket. You're taking
Right.
food off our table. And it was the perfect speech. It just, it worked like a charm. And you have to think about that. There's the use of timeouts is big in the course that we took. The use of but there has to be some kind of consequence, or the child will lose respect for you.
Right.
And that's you just don't want to go there, because that's when you get these high conflict cases where the kids are running the show.
Right.
It turns both houses into mad houses.
Right. Right. And yeah, and like I had a client earlier who said, well, I'm going to, here's the text I'm going to send to my child, and it said something like the other parent's lawyer already agreed with my lawyer that this is how we were going to do it. And I was like, don't send that.
Yeah.
That's
please.
called putting the child in the middle. Like, you don't talk to the child about court, lawyers, none
Right.
of that stuff, because that's putting them in the middle. And that's the number one thing, like Thomas said, that the court really doesn't want to see. But early on, we went through a training with Thomas's ex-wife and her husband at that time, and the two of us. And we went through parent-child interaction therapy, where all four of the parents, the parents and the two parents and the two step parents, all participated, and we all learned the same method for carrying out a timeout. So even though the rules were different in the homes, and Thomas and I have talked about this before, we implemented timeout in the exact same way in both homes, so that we could create as much consistency as we possibly could for the children. But the thing I found really interesting about redirecting children's behavior that you're talking about is, I had children very young. Okay. I was 19 when my first son was born. And so, pretty much yelling's the only form of discipline, other than the occasional spanking, that I really ever implemented, because
She yells at me too.
I do, but I was not, I didn't have the experience or the knowledge or the patience or any of those things to know how to parent in that way. And so when we took this class, Thomas's children were really little, probably 3 and 4, 4 and 5, something like that, when we audited redirecting children's behavior. And so my kids would have been, 15, 16, somewhere in that neighborhood. And one of the things they dealt with was sibling arguing.
Yeah.
And the thing I know about sibling arguing is, no matter what ages your children are, they will hit different points where they get along well, and they'll hit different points where they have lots of conflict. And that was true of my kids. They're 4 years apart. And it's true of Thomas's kids, and they're only 11 months apart. So we've had different stages with each pair where they're getting along fine with their brother, and different stages where they're punching each other's lights out. And one of the things I found really helpful in the redirecting children's behavior was, it's like, if you come in and they're arguing about a toy, my default when my kids were little was always kind of like, okay, the brother's 4 years older. I just always made my older one give in. No, you gotta just give it to the other one, because he's the baby and he doesn't know what he's arguing about or whatever. And so I really did that a lot to my older one. And in retrospect, I recognized that was a poor way of parenting him, and I feel bad about it. But what they
Scarred
did,
for life. now.
what they did in redirecting children's behavior is, if they're sitting there arguing over a truck, you just go over and you take the truck and you put it on top of the refrigerator, and you say, okay, no truck for, the truck is in timeout for, 24 hours until the two of you can figure out a way to share it and get along. And it was just like bells went off for me. It was like, oh my goodness, there's a solution to this that doesn't involve picking one child over the other, which is, I think, a big challenge for a lot of parents when you have younger kids.
Yeah. But whatever you do, you got to have some rules in the house. And I think chief among them has to be that the adults in the house are respected.
Right.
And that includes step parents, by the way.
Right.
Since I have selfish reasons for saying that. I was a step parent.
As do I.
Yes.
You were, you are.
I am a step
You are
parent.
still a step parent.
Well, yeah, but
they don't live with us.
Right.
Yeah, it's a
I
little easier to be a step parent from afar.
I am a step grandparent.
You are. It's easy right now though because they're cute.
Yeah, they sure are. But you've got to teach them respect, and it's important, I think, in that context to teach respect not only for you and the step parent, which is your new mate, and also for the adults in the other world.
Right.
But there has to be a serious consequence for disrespect, because if you let that go till they're teenagers, they won't listen to you.
Right.
So the rule is to respect the adults. And if there was one thing that I would use corporal punishment for, it would be that.
Disrespect.
It would be perhaps blatant disobedience.
Right. Disobedience.
Like,
Yeah, that's
I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. Or you tell them to do something, they say no.
Yeah.
You
right.
know, it's like, oh no, we're not going to go there. Because Thomas is right. That might be funny or cute or whatever when they're 4 or 5. Like, listen, Linda.
Listen,
And
Linda.
if you haven't seen that video, go out and look it up because that little boy really is cute and it's funny. But it's true.
But it's not funny.
But it's not funny because it continues to carry over. And when they're teenagers, you just have no control whatsoever. But, you know, we frequently hear the court say, you need to be the parent.
Right.
Excuse me, I had a hiccup. To be the parent and not be afraid to discipline the child.
Right.
Because what happens is what I always say, the tail starts wagging the dog.
Yep.
You know, then you got the child deciding where they want to be, you know, when they want to be there, how long they want to stay there, when they want to go back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we recently, you know, had some misbehavior from one of Thomas's kids, and we said, you know, you're not transitioning back to your mom's. I mean, we had already had a discussion with mom and discussed what we were going to do. Thomas and I didn't just.
Because we've been doing this for 15 years and we can talk to her.
Right. We had consensus among the 3 of us that are the current parents. And we decided that we were going to, you know, I mean, her and Thomas really, but me too, that he really shouldn't transition. And the simple reason is because, you know, mom's work schedule is such at the moment that there's not enough supervision on her parenting time to be able to have an effective grounding for the infraction. So we agreed that he would stay here through the grounding period so that Thomas and I could kind of, you know, keep control and kind of keep a clamp down. But, you know, so, you know, and his response to that was, you can't make me do that. I'm going to my mom's. And it's like, no, you're not. We already talked to your mom.
If you can do that, it's good. That's really good.
We already talked to your mom. We're all on the same page.
And again, you know, we're trying to raise respectful adults that, you know, that basically they perform their obligations. They follow the rules, you know, not like robots. Okay. Right. You know, everybody is different and we all, you know, and sometimes you have to challenge authority when authority is ungodly, as we would say in church, or if it's clearly, you know, if you have to take a stand on principle. But for the most part, the successful adulthood is about pleasing your boss and about respecting the cop on the beat. And,
right.
And
the judge in the courtroom.
And the judge in the courtroom.
Right.
You know who my parenting hero is? Jerry Wilson.
Oh, and thankfully that's not her name anymore. But
yeah,
because you're saying, I don't like saying people's names.
Tammy has this friend. We'll just call her Joan.
Yeah, she is incredible. Her kids are grown; they're about my age, and she was a single mom, and she came up with some of the most creative ways of just calmingly implementing just the most like severe you just like she would say something and you'd be like, why didn't I ever think of that?
Yeah,
you know,
she is my hero.
Yeah, like she talked about one of her children when they were a teenager was really challenging in particular. I think we all have one.
Yeah, it's
kind of more challenging than the others. And you know, she said that at one point the child lost, like, you know, she went in and she took her pillow and she took the sheets off her blanket, and then she took the sheets off the bed, and she just like until she just stripped her down to the bare. And it's like, you don't think of that. You don't think of going and taking your child's pillow, but it's like they got to sleep all night without a pillow. It won't kill them, but it will cause them discomfort, and they'll think twice about, doing things. And then at one point, her child said something to her, and she said, "You're talking to me like somebody that doesn't think they have anything to lose." And the child was like, "Well, what can I possibly lose? You've taken my blanket and my pillow."
You have to say that in the way that she put it. You're talking to like somebody who doesn't have anything to lose.
Who doesn't think they have anything to lose. And the child just lost it.
And she's calm.
She's
yeah. That's cool.
And the child,
she is unflappable.
Yeah, and the child's freaking out and is in a room with, no blankets, no pillow, no sheets, no, whatever extra things were in the room are gone. She's down to a bed frame and, mattress, and she's going, well,
still defiant.
What the hell else can you take from me?
That's right. Right.
So my friend goes in and she takes the pins out of the door hinges and removes the door and says, "Now you've lost your privacy. Right. Do you want to keep going?"
Right.
And it's just like, I would never have come up with that.
Yeah. She's brilliant.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So, but the thing is, you can't do that in an atmosphere of fear.
Right.
You can't be afraid of your kid.
Right.
And you can't be afraid of your co-parent.
Right.
We've done other episodes. I mean, you can't bow down to this business of, well, I'm going to tell the court and you're going to be in big trouble, because you don't know how the court's going to rule or how it's going to see this. But I guarantee you that if you're too soft and you're not, and this child is, say, not doing their homework and they're not performing in school and they're being disrespectful to authorities, you're going to lose custody over that.
Well, and that's why the court really comes down on parents who say, "Oh, the child doesn't want to transition to the other parent." Now, look, I before I even go there, like I know personally of multiple cases where that's not possible. I've known of children that have actual like physical symptoms and problems if they try to get them to go or whatever. But let's face it, for the majority of us, if we go up to one of the kids and say, "You're going with your mother today," and they say, "Well, it's only 3, I don't have to transition for 3 more days." Well, so sorry, we've had to make a change in the parenting schedule. This is what we've agreed on with your mother, and you're going.
Yep.
Period. End of discussion. So the court expects you to be the parent, and that's why you have parents that are sometimes accused of, withholding the child and different things, because they feel like if your child wouldn't go to school, you'd find a way to make them.
Yeah.
Right. You wouldn't sit by and just say, "Oh, well, they don't want to go to school." So they don't, so they don't accept that really in a lot of ways as, an option for them to not go with the other parent either.
Right.
But I think the main thing that we want you to get out of this episode is just don't be afraid to parent in your own home. Even if you don't have the level of cooperation that we currently have with Thomas's ex-wife, and believe me, in the beginning, we did not.
Right.
We did parallel parenting for 2 to 3 years and rarely even spoke with her or communicated with her.
I think it was more like 5.
I don't know if it was that long because, well, Isaiah was 2, and then when he started kindergarten and was homeschooled, that's when her and I started developing more rapport. So it was about 3 years that we didn't really, 2.5, that we didn't really talk to her or interact with her. But
find a new mate that is nice enough to run interference for you with your ex.
It helps because I don't have the emotional. Her and I don't have the emotional dynamic that the two of you had at that point. But we've been doing this for a really long time, and in the beginning we couldn't, and we didn't agree on. I think him and his ex-wife agreed like fundamentally on values and things like that for the most part, but they didn't agree on day-to-day raising of the kids and the way things should be done and implemented and all that kind of thing. And so it was challenging in a lot of ways. But I think you have to let the other parent in their world, and you have to parent in your world unless you have some kind of proof of neglect or abuse or something. And not just fear that it's going to happen. That's a different thing, but actual proof of it. If you don't, and you can't prove there's any abuse or anything going on in the other world, but you just don't like a lot of it, then you have to just stay in your lane and parent and discipline in your world and let whatever happens in the other world happen.
Right.
And my experience is exactly what Thomas said in the very beginning. the children will gravitate towards the more stable world. We've seen that over and over and over in our. It's not about who's the, most permissive. It might be when they're 16 and 17 because they have their own agenda and they want to go do their own things, and then it sort of becomes more about the parent that is the most permissive. But up until that point, it's really not. And if you can establish that authority all through those times, then when they get to that 16, 17 age range, being with the more permissive parent is at a higher amount of time really isn't an option because you've established that authority to say, no, we're not going to do that.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so we hope that was a helpful discussion on discipline. We appreciate you joining us. If you are listening to the podcast, don't forget to rate and review us and also subscribe so you get notified as new episodes are released each week. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit like on this video and also subscribe so you get notified as new videos are released each week. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your hosts, Thomas and Tammy Ferreira. For more information, visit www.divorceuniversityonline.com.